Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of Inside the Marble Palace, Post Media Saskatchewan's look at Saskatchewan politics and all its goings on. I am Murray Mandryk, political columnist for Leader Post and Star Phoenix. Joining me, Jeremy Simes, our legislative reporter for the newspapers, and provincial affairs reporter Adam Hunter of CBC. Thanks, guys, for joining us. This is
You're
great.
welcome.
We have a lot to talk about in relation to the NDP leadership. It is a little more than a week away. The vote is on Sunday, June 26th. Two candidates, Kaitlyn Harvey, who people probably know less about because she only ran once in 2020 in Saskatoon Riversdale, is a new candidate, and Carla Beck, who has been an LA for Lakeview since 2016 in Regina, who I think is the favorite, perhaps the heavily favored. But that seems to be becoming an interesting issue in itself. Is this debate has quickly morphed into a battle between the party establishment, as they're called, and the activists, as they're also called, who are promoting a greater push towards social issues and certainly environmental ones. Jeremy, let's start off with you. How did this play out in the forum this week, I believe on Tuesday night in Regina?
Yeah, for sure. So I was watching the forum, and there was two things that stood out to me in particular. When they were asked what separates you two, Caitlin brought up the fact that we haven't implemented many of the party resolutions that we have into our campaign. And then on the flip side, Carla was saying, well, we need to consult with people, and they're not just going to be like moths coming to a flame and just accepting our policies. And near the end of the debate, Caitlin said, she took aim at Carla and the MLAs for going to the Weyburn oil and gas show, and for, I guess, also Carla having a presser at one of the fracking businesses in the city. So I saw those two things, and that really stood out with me. And I texted her and I said, hey, can we have a chat? And I really was just going to ask about those two things. It kind of devolved as our conversation kept going. And one of my questions was, well, when you're bringing this up, do you feel that you're going to be a target? They're going to target you for kind of going against the establishment in this way. And she's like, well, I've been a target since day one. And then she goes on to say, they want Carla, they wanted Ryan gone, and now he's gone. And basically just saying, the party establishment makes it really difficult for candidates like her to pass environmental policy, to get through these ideas, and that really the establishment is kind of controlling who they want to be as leader. Now, in defense of all of that, the party president is saying, that's not the case. These Sheila Whalen was saying these debates are actually good to have. We need these debates in our party, in our caucus, but it's also not the first time this has happened too. In February, we had a former NDP executive, Deanna Ogle, resign after she said, Ryan was undermined. And it's just all kind of come to a head with Caitlin, I guess, making these accusations that she did. Now, just in defense of, or in Carla Beck's defense, she told me, in regards to that oil and gas conference or convention in Weyburn, she said, we can't treat people who work in this industry as opponents, and she's all about kind of consulting and kind of bringing more people into the party that maybe don't see themselves in the NDP, like oil and gas workers.
Well, let's bring Adam in here because you were at the live event. You follow this closely on Twitter, and having been around for a while, you certainly understand sort of the dynamic in terms of why perhaps the Saskatchewan NDP aren't connecting in real life with the rest of the province, and the problem that creates. So, can you speak to those three elements? What was it like at the live event? Who are these forums attracting? What is it like by comparison on Twitter and social media, where, as I think Jeremy outlined, most of this fight seems to be happening? I think most of the province is kind of oblivious to this. And speaking of that, why is the rest of the province still seemingly oblivious to yet another NDP leadership race, the fourth in the last 13 years, and the fourth? It'll be the certainly the fourth leader that the NDP have had in uh, in 15 years of opposition. So start with the crowd there, and how that sort of contrasts with the whole social media thing, and how this division seems to be being driven right now.
Yeah, I'm not too surprised. I think, given what was happening at the live event, and watching the other forums, and even hearing from and the leaders throughout the campaign, they are quite different, and they have different policy positions. They have different answers. They have different priorities. That was pretty clear at the forum on Monday. The crowd, it wasn't a big crowd there, and it was, I thought they were fair to both candidates. There was a lot of applause for both Kaitlyn Harvey and Carla Beck, even though maybe the crowd skewed a bit more to Carla Beck because it was in Regina. She had a few more supporters and staffers there. But Harvey is running this as, the outsider, and so for her to say, I'm the outsider and people don't want me in, is not a surprise at all. Carla Beck, decided she was going to run. It was only a few days after Ryan Miley decided to step down. Pretty quickly, she had three of the most prominent and popular MLAs in the party on her side, and endorsing her at her event in Trent Wotherspoon, Nicole Sarr, and Alina Young, three of whom would be seen as potential candidates for leadership. Trent's already ran a couple times. People were speculating that Nicole or Alina would run. Nicole was a very popular interim leader. So if you're going to talk about the establishment versus the outsiders, we're only talking about a dozen MLAs. So it's pretty easy to see, that Carla Beck would have fans within her caucus, and is, Jeremy and I know, and Murray, that she's popular within that caucus, and they are a tight group of those group of Regina MLAs. I think the thing that is really stands out to me was that comment at the end by Kaitlyn Harvey that Jeremy mentioned. That's the one that I wrote about as well. And it was the first time I really saw the two women, one of them take a shot, to be honest, at the other one throughout this campaign. It's been very cordial. Carla Beck even made a comment earlier on that my opponent isn't in this room. The opponent isn't the Saskatchewan people. She was again signaling that workers in different industries aren't the enemy of the NDP, that we need to recruit them to our party. She said it again and again, and she doesn't say it in directly, but she kind of dances around it. She says we're hearing from people that have never been seen in our party before. We're getting people from these different walks of life, and we have to embrace them into our party. Her message is much more about uniting and bringing in this broad base. It's more of a message that she's trying to appeal to non-NDP voters, people that aren't even probably voting in this membership, in this that aren't party members. The membership deadline's already passed. She's trying to sell herself to Saskatchewan people for 2024. Kaitlyn Harvey, on the other hand, is speaking to NDP members and a certain group of NDP members. She's not speaking to people, to the entire NDP membership, although she says she is. Her message is plainly about the environment. She does talk about other things like reconciliation. I won't sell that short. And I think that's something that she feels very very close to. She's Métis. She's spoken about the need for true reconciliation, that there more efforts need to be done in that, and she has a lot on her platform to that piece. But much of her argument in questions about infrastructure, affordability, education, her answers all go back to the environment and climate change, and that's speaking to a specific part of the NDP membership. So that is a big difference between the two, and you're going to see, I think, when it comes to the leadership day and the speech, the Carla Beck's going to stay on those same themes. When asked about her priorities, she talked about communication, talked about growing the party. It wasn't about necessarily economic priorities, although she did mention those at the end. And Kaitlyn Harvey's priorities, she mentioned, attacking this Saskatchewan party government, holding them accountable. But much of her argument, as I said, and much of her pitch to NDP members has been about climate change. She calls it a sustainable Saskatchewan, getting off oil and gas, and she makes no apologies for that. And I think that's where the two really differ. And I think that's probably what offended her so much about Carla Beck going to the oil and gas show, showing up at a machine shop for a campaign event. Uh, but Beck's trying to appeal to a wider range of Saskatchewan voters, and as I said, people that probably aren't even going to vote in this leadership race.
That's a great point. I want to circle back uh, to that the next time around, Adam, because I think that's fascinating, something for people to learn. But first, I just want to get into what these people are like as leaders, and we've all sat down with them and talked to them individually, and we've all talked to dozens of hundreds, in my case, millions of politicians, being the length of my tenure. They're very different when you sit down with them in person uh, than maybe they are at the front of a in front of a podium at a debate, or certainly in terms of how they present themselves on social media. So I'll just start with you, Jeremy, in regard to this. You've sat down, as I have, and talked to both of them, as Adam has, and whatnot. And I found that sitting down with them, they project a very different style, a very different message in terms of what you sometimes hear at, as I say, at in front of the podium and such. What was your impression of them as people? I know generally I find it so much more productive and better to actually sit down and talk to politicians one on one, because you get a better sense of them, and they remove themselves, I mean, think maybe a bit from their own rhetoric. What was it like when you sat down with the two of them for profile interviews, and what did you glean uh, from that experience, Jeremy?
Yeah, for sure. I think they're both easy to talk to. They're both really approachable, and I think they can talk your ear off, really. You ask them a question, and they can really
Yeah.
they'll give you a long answer, which is totally fine. And I with Caitlin, I find she's really passionate, like Adam mentioned, about the environment. She's really passionate about certain issues, and that really does come across. You saw that at the leadership debate where she started to look like she might tear up at some points, right? And that also comes through in the interviews. She also comes across as really not politician-y in a way. Like she's very like, I'm an outsider. I'm not the typical kind of person. I speak from the heart, and you can really tell she wears her heart on her sleeve. That's my impression of her, and just that passion really comes through. Carla, she's also very approachable, I find. I think she is all about and she has mentioned this, but she's all about trying to find connections with people. I know every time I interview her, whatever I'm talking about, she's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And then we talk about that, and she's all about just trying to have those small little conversations.
Connections
Yeah, and
and
connections and things like that. And I think that's the brand she is trying to put forward as a leader. But again, I think both are very smart, and they both are very passionate about different things.
I'm going to circle back to you, Adam, because it feeds into what you were saying earlier, and as Jeremy put it, not very politician-y, because one of the better observations I think I saw on social media from, I believe, a New Democrat, or I'm guessing he was, basically saying that we have a choice right now between an activist and a politician, and that in this case, Adam, that neither one of them might best serve the NDP right now, as it needs to connect to a broader range of Saskatchewan people, because I'm not so sure that the bulk of Saskatchewan people want an environmental or social activist right now any more than they want another politician. What is your sense in terms of that level of presentation, and how does it present problems? We've long talked about the reality that Carla Beck may not have been everybody's first choice, even within the NDP, in terms of the potential leadership candidates. But the choice between the two of them, the sort of the activist and the politician, while obviously right now creating a significant amount of heat and fire, might not be creating a lot of light in terms of the NDP and it moving forward. What's your sense in terms of how the party emerges from this particular leadership, given that reality that it's pretty much against someone that's kind of been around politics for a little while now and his establishment, versus someone that's sort of a bit of an activist and is trying to present that view?
Well, I think for the party, they're happy that they have a race because
Yeah.
it looked for a while that maybe there would be one person and then Carla Beck would be acclimated. And I don't think the party, wants that. They want a debate. They wanted it. They want to have, some buzz. They want to, also raise some money. I think that's the one thing that, we forget about these leadership races. They are, or if you see what's happening with the UCP or the federal Conservatives, the Saskatchewan Party's leadership race, that raised a lot of money for the party, and it generated a lot of buzz, and it was an exchange of ideas. And I think back to that Sask Party leadership race, you had a number of candidates. There was more, sort of nastiness, and eventually the person that wasn't people's first choice, even on their ballot, Scott Moe, became the leader of the party and the premier. Um, so the NDP probably was hoping for, and I know I talked to people before the race, that they had maybe 3 or 4 people run in this, and they had a diverse number of candidates. And Kaitlyn Harvey came at a really late time in this, and I think that's a disadvantage for her. And it's also not helpful for the party to, in a way, they do need a leader in place, but they also, previously with Trent Walderspoon and Ryan Miley, they had months to sell themselves to members. They had months to sign up new members and raise money for themselves and the party and generate buzz and exchange ideas. And it was, something that I think is lacking from this race, unfortunately. And we talked about, this remark that Kaitlyn Harvey made, and her interview with Jeremy. That's really the first time we've seen any, as I said, animosity or any, real difference where someone has called something out and been critical of the race. But it was always going to be tough on a tight timeline. You're going to see people, line up behind their person. Carla Beck has a huge fundraising advantage. It was obvious to me in the building there on Monday night, and she has, more money for advertisement. She's got more money for flyers and buttons. Kaitlyn Harvey doesn't have that same sort of presence. Carla Beck definitely has more of a staff behind her to help her with her message and her speeches and things like that. So that's something that's played out. As for the general population, people aren't paying attention to this. I don't think it's a party that, as I mentioned, only has a handful of MLAs. It's we're getting close to summertime. The timing isn't great to kind of generate buzz. There's other things going on, obviously. Uh, but I do think that the party will probably, based on what Jeremy wrote about and what we've talked about, have some as they do after leaderships, have some healing to do, have some bridges to build. Kaitlyn Harvey, don't forget, is already committed to running in a by-election in Meewasin for Ryan Miley's seat, which I think is super fascinating in light of what she said this week. Is that if she's saying there's people that are trying to edge out Ryan Miley and get him out as the leader, and now she's claiming those people are in the caucus or in the party, and then she's trying to join them, in a few months. That's really fascinating to see how that works out. But they can't really afford to have too many fights or squabbles internally, because they need to, as I said, build towards 2024 and trying to mount more of a challenge to the Saskatchewan party, even as all of us have written about these other parties that are trying to get more oxygen, the parties on the right and the United, movement there, and the Buffalo Party, and then the Liberal Party, who's been more active recently. So even the suggestion in Jeremy's reporting that there'd be another left party coming out of this in some way, I think is really interesting. And the Sask Party must just really enjoy that there's, different fractions are sort of breaking off, and that's only going to sort of help their cause, because they don't really have a, true solid opposition against them right now. In the NDP, they're sort of a behemoth with their, 45 plus seats right now.
Well, let's kind of end it with that, because that is kind of interesting. Jeremy, we'll start with you. What was kind of the wow moment that you've either seen in the leadership race, or in terms of what a candidate said, or the reaction to it in this particular NDP leadership campaign? As Adam said, most people aren't paying a lot of attention to it, and there are a lot of there might not seem like there was a lot of those wow moments, but certainly I think your story, and as Adam's story has started to create a little bit of buzz and interest, for good or bad, in the NDP leadership race. What struck you, Jeremy, is the first is the thing that really surprised you in terms of what was said?
Yeah, I'll go back to the story I wrote yesterday. I think that interview where Kaitlyn Harvey just said, "I've been a target since day one. They wanted Ryan gone. They want Carla." That really struck me when she said that. I kind of internally just I really had to think about it and froze, and I was like, okay, I just couldn't think or believe she would say something like that. Particularly, she wants to run in the Meewasin by-election. If she wins and she has to go into that caucus, I don't think it's going to be a friendly first few days. Again, a lot of healing would have to happen. So that is really what stood out to me so far in this campaign.
What about you, Adam? Same question, pretty much. What kind of has stood out to you as this is going to be maybe a bit of a defining moment for the NDP going forward, at least for the next little while, if not right into the next election further?
Yeah, I think if the two candidates were similar, then it wouldn't be that as interesting. And I never thought that was going to be really the case in this race. There was always sort of speculation that different people from as you say, more of like an activist, environmentalist, whatever you want to label it, wing of the party was going to run. Um, but it's too bad for the NDP that they don't have two or three more candidates to try and exchange more of those ideas to cause people to kind of stand up and go, wow, okay, this is happening, this is interesting, I like this person, like that person. You get different exchange of ideas, and maybe you do end up having a couple of candidates who emerge and can be future MLAs or run in a leadership race. Ryan Miley, took him 3 tries to become the leader. He was a young kind of outsider at one point, and did have a shot, a couple of times, of actually surprising everyone and winning. So I think people need to remember that that's sort of that genesis that's happened before in the NDP. But they have ahead of them just a massive challenge, and I think Carla Beck's message of trying to build, and she's trying to sell herself to Saskatchewan voters, not necessarily NDP members, is a really interesting one. And that's judged by some of the choices they've made, as you say, with Trent Waterspoon and Alina Young at the oil and gas show. That's obviously something that they planned and thought about and strategized over. Her launch at Extended Hydraulics, which is a Métis owned small business outside of Regina, that supplies machines and implements for the mining sector and other areas. That's also a coordinated, decided, this is where we're going to do this. And I think that's something we have to look past this membership. If Carla Beck ends up winning, and it sounds from Kaitlyn Harvey that she's not giving herself a lot of chance to win that in some of her comments. And I think you hear a lot more also from Carla Beck in talking about winning in 2024 than you do from Kaitlyn Harvey. Kaitlyn Harvey's message is much more about what's the party's goal, what's the party stand for, what's our policy positions, as Jeremy mentioned. I think that's it's sort of a different position than Carla Beck, and they're positioning themselves in different ways. And that'll give members a choice. And we don't know how many members they've signed up yet. We don't know where these members are, their heads are at, whether they're loyal to Ryan Miley. You'll remember most of the last winners of the NDP leadership have been from Saskatoon. So that's, a significant voting base. And that's something that also, Carla Beck and her team are going to have to think about. I'm sure they've strategized that as well. But we'll have to see how those votes come out in a couple of weeks here, less than 2 weeks. And I think, thinking back to the last leadership race, there was really a toss-up feeling with Trent Waterspoon and Ryan Miley. Ryan Miley, had raised more money, but Trent Waterspoon had more sort of union, and he had taken those donations, and there was a position that they had a difference of opinion on that. Ryan Miley was established; he was already an elected MLA, which Kaitlyn Harvey isn't. He had more name recognition. He had definitely a solid group of supporters in Saskatoon and a base there. And that's something that Kaitlyn Harvey doesn't have. She's just kind of on the scene now as someone running in politics. So that makes this a lot different, and that takes a bit of the drama out of it, I think. But it's still, we were saying we were surprised by what happened the other night and some of the comments to follow. And so, who knows what's going to happen in the next few days and what happens after the leadership. But it's certainly fascinating. It's going to be interesting to see what happens and how this plays out over the next 2 weeks or so.
Well, it's going to be fun to watch, and I hope to have both you guys back for the breakdown after the June 26th vote. But I guess that's about all we have time for today. So thanks very much, both to Jeremy, Adam, for your insights, and we'll see you guys next time on Inside the Marble Palace.
Thanks.